podcast. I'm Frusile. Thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time joining me, the philosophy of this podcast is to speak to the players who are shaping the metagame so that their voices can be heard. This week's voice, Caleb Gannon's, which means this week's episode is a little different than our previous podcasts. Usually, the people who are shaping the metagame are tournament winners or someone who's taken an innovative approach to an archetype and found their way into a top 8. Usually I'm tracking down those people to pick their brains, but this time it's a bit different. We're talking to a bona fide deck builder. It's a very interesting conversation. I was always under the impression that deck building was an art, but it turns out deck building is a science. And when it comes to the science of Storm, well, there's really one scientist who sticks out. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Could you tell me a bit about yourself?
So I'm Caleb Gannon. Been playing Magic for like 13 years. I started playing right around Shards of Alara, like right when Zendikar came out. I played casually for a bit, and then I started, my first competitive event was like right when Caw-Blade was like big in fruition, and I brought like a mono red deck with Skitter of Lizards. I actually got second place in that tournament, but stopped playing Magic for a bit. I think that's when I was like in middle school, and then I took some time. So right now I'm getting a PhD in machine learning, so I kind of had taken a break from Magic between kind of when Caw-Blade started. I kind of quit competitive Magic till I had more free time during school. So now I'm finishing up school with my PhD in machine learning. Not very good to talk about myself, but that kind of explains the gist of what I'm doing right now.
I think you're doing just fine. Now, tell me about when you first started playing Magic. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I used to play the Lord of the Rings card game. I don't know if that still exists. Have you heard of it?
I don't. I'd be surprised.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, but I used to play that, and the card shop I played at all the time kind of like was big into Magic. One guy gave me like a starter deck, and then me and my friends kind of went from there, started building decks, and just got excited about the game. For me, it was the art. So like the Lord of the Rings card game was actually very similar mechanically to Magic. I gotta find what the game is, but the artwork was just like screen grabs from like the movie, so it wasn't very like diverse or interesting, but like the art on Magic cards is so unique and cool, especially the old ones, and that's really what drew me into the game.
Okay, so now how did you get started with Pauper? And follow-up question, what made you stay with Pauper?
So for me, Pauper was kind of a frustration with how the metagame is going with like standard and modern and stuff like that, where the individual power level on cards is so high that you can just like play a 4-mana thing, and that one card has the ability to like, let's take Jace the Mind Sculptor, for example, right? He can like bounce a creature so he can answer the board. He can draw cards with Brainstorm, so like put you ahead. And then he also is a win condition with his ultimate. And like, to me, that makes games come down to like, or like deck building come down to less synergy and more just kind of like, I put all the good cards in one deck and I won because my cards were more powerful. And that, like, it was kind of boring to me. So Pauper is very exciting in that way. I think Planeswalkers in particular are like a design mistake in my perspective, most of them at least, because they check all those boxes of like, this card wins the game. So Pauper doesn't have that, and it's like in this rare niche scenario where like the answers are so effective and the threats are not great on their own. Like there's no Tarmogoyf in Pauper really. So the games come down to more synergy and deck building and kind of like creativity and resource usage. And those two are really like the reasons why I like Magic, and Pauper just kind of maximizes that. And then as an added bonus, it's really cheap. So, you know, you can play way more decks.
Or in your case, you can build way more decks. I do have a lot of questions about your deck building, but I sort of want to start with asking you when you started making content, right? What motivated you to want to do content?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think. So I started, I think it was July of 2017. I think that's correct. It's been about 2 years. I started, honestly, because my girlfriend at the time, actually still the same girlfriend, but Vintage Cube was out Yeah, it was right when the Summer Vintage Cube had come out, and I was playing all the time because I love Vintage Cube. She was like kind of getting upset that I was playing so much Vintage Cube. She's like, it's not that productive. Like, you should probably be doing like schoolwork and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I'm just going to record content and then it will be productive because it like makes money or whatever. And so I just started recording videos, not out of spite, but just to like show her and other people who have like said playing Magic is like not a useful hobby, that like it is useful, and like sharing the content with other people. I mean, it impacts people's lives, and it like, I think it hopefully makes people's days better and things like that. So that's kind of what got me started. Very different than why I still do it.
Well, would you like to explain what's kept you going?
Yeah, so kind of along the lines of what I was saying before, like about how it makes people's days better. Like, I think I have a special, I don't know, ability or something specifically for like creative deck building. Number one is creative deck building, but the second is just like having fun while playing Magic. And I had noticed a lot of my friends when they play, they like get frustrated or they just don't enjoy the game for what it is. And so I kind of want to help people understand that Magic is about more than just playing to win, getting mad when you lose, getting upset at like, you know, when the game doesn't go your way. And from the comments and feedback I'm getting, it seems like people are really like, hopefully I'm helping them understand that there's a little bit more to Magic and more fun that you can have if you take a more positive attitude towards it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things within your control with a game, how you react to things, how you choose to approach all the situations, what you play at the tournament, the choices you make in the games themselves, as well as how you choose to react to the social situations which are, occur. There can be a lot of beauty in that. You can spend some time preparing beforehand, work on a nice spicy list. Maybe you do what I do and you just copy other people's decks, but your sideboard is unique and interesting, right? Because you're not that creative, but there's a lot of things you can do with the game, even leading up to the week of the tournament. I remember when I was younger, my freshman year of college, it would be like Tuesday night and I'd be excited about Friday Night Magic, just because at that time in my life, Magic was really important and I couldn't wait to play it. And so Wednesday morning in the shower, I'm showering, but I'm also thinking about why I'm playing certain cards or, why I'm not playing certain cards. And I've always enjoyed games that stick with you, right? When you're done playing, the game still comes with you. And Magic has a lot of opportunity for that. And that's especially true for a deck builder, because you can constantly be working on an idea, or maybe you have an idea, but you're working on refining that idea. You said you started with Vintage Cube videos, which is actually what I knew that. I'd seen those. And I, gotta tell you that in my assessment, you definitely understand Vintage Cube. So I knew that you had Vintage Cube content out there, and I was kind of surprised to see you transition into Pauper content. What motivated you to do that? Why did you choose Pauper for all the different formats? Is just the frustrations with not wanting to play anything else? Is that right?
Actually, Pauper was kind of so there's the reason I mentioned before, which is like why I like the format so much, but this was also kind of like a budgetary constraint, because as you mentioned, the main purpose of my Pauper content is more deck building than it is like competitive strategy. I'm a PhD student, right? I don't have like a huge budget to spend on like buying a new modern deck every day. So honestly, it was just budgetary reasons why I started making specifically Pauper videos. But also, I knew I would like it more. And the card pool is so big. Like, compared to like brewing for standard, there's a lot more possibility of, different combinations of cards you could put together, that it felt like there was more longevity for brewing in a format like this.
Well, it's interesting that you've done so, because I always say in the introduction of every episode that the philosophy of this podcast is to speak to the players who are shaping the metagame. Generally, that means tracking down tournament winners, right? When I first relocated here, and I started looking for a local game store, trying to see maybe if there was one that had Pauper, maybe on, a weeknight sort of thing. I went around to a handful of different stores, popped in, asked some questions, and I remember going to one store, and they didn't have Pauper, but this kid, came up as I was asking the shopkeep about their tournament schedule, what they offered, what was popular. He came up and he's like, I have a Pauper deck. I'm like, oh, that's cool, man. You play Pauper? He's like, high school kid. He's like, yeah, I have Gristlebrand. I'm like, this is the first person to know what Pauper is. I've been to like 8 stores, and he's rocking, one of your decks, and he's super excited about it. And I wonder how many different players out there in their backpack full of decks, or some people have that case with all the different deck boxes go in the case. I wonder how many copies of Gristlebrand, right? I wonder how many copies of your mono green Storm deck, or your Soul Sisters deck. I wonder how many copies of these decks are just randomly out there in people's backpacks so that they have a Pauper option to play with when they hang out at a local game store or go to a larger tournament. It really made me start to wonder about how you shape, not necessarily the challenge metagame each week, which is the sort of thing I'm usually talking about with the challenge winner, rather than the hyper competitive aspects of Pauper. You're making waves in people who dabble, people who are just somewhat aware of Pauper. And what does that mean to you that like random people in this world like what you do enough that they're willing to copy your deck list and just, battle it at every opportunity? Because that kid would have been down to play Pauper against me if I had a deck on me.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I didn't even know. That's a cool story that some random person knew that. It's honestly another reason why I keep doing this is I just get people saying like, I played your deck, all my friends loved it, and they built it, and they're excited about it. And it's the community aspect of Magic that I'm hoping to bring together, like just bring people together around a common thing. Like, check out this deck. This guy's like, energy tapping a Gurmag Angler and then sacrificing it and then drawing cards, and they like bring their friends over. Kind of the same point you mentioned before. I have other friends who play Magic, and they have independently discovered my channel from their friends being like, hey, check out this cool deck this guy made. And they're like, that's Caleb Gannon. I knew him in college. And just all of these stories is like really cool for me to hear, but it's just so motivating to keep doing this because I think tabletop Magic in particular is very important over, I know my content's online, but I don't have the budget yet, hopefully I will, to like make in-person games. But I think the community aspect of like tabletop Magic is so important for society, but also just for like the growth of Magic. Because like playing Arena, you're kind of like just looking at a screen, playing against someone else against a screen, and you have like 4 preset emotes. Whereas playing in Pauper, or Paper, you have this like, you're playing against someone, you can have a conversation, you can make friends and things like that.
I think it's a different experience. It's definitely a purer experience, or at least it can be, right? There's a lot of potential. Not all interactions are equal, but I've definitely had quite a few local game stores over the years where I've enjoyed being a member of their community. And I'd say that I agree with you. Community is an importance. I'd say community is a core value of mine as well. So I think it's cool. That's where you get some of your reward from, is the community aspect. Speaking of Gristlebrand, have you updated the deck lately?
Yeah, so it's Fischlbrand, not Gristlebrand, but
oh, what did I say? Did I say Gristlebrand twice?
Yeah, you said it this whole time. It's okay.
I said like 4 times, didn't I?
It's a pun on Gristlebrand.
Yeah, and I know that, but it's a shame that I couldn't, it's nice for you to come on the podcast and for me to mispronounce your work. That's a good thing.
It's okay. I've had much stranger things happen. Yeah, so I'm trying to think, what's the last build that you've seen? Because a thing I get a lot, especially with Fischlbrand, is people like saying they love the deck, and then they show me the build that they have, and it's something that I made like 5 videos ago, and I'm like, yo, you gotta catch up. I guess I could just walk through the progression of the deck if you'd like.
Yeah, because I think that you have a lot of players out there that would appreciate that, whether they want to try it just for funsies or whether they did see it 5 videos ago and they're not familiar with the upgrades that you've made.
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. So Fischlbrand started from, I was on Reddit and I found someone, I wish I knew their name, but they posted that essentially Epicure of Blood and Weather the Storm kind of came together to be like a makeshift grape shot, because whenever you gain life, you do 1 damage, or the opponent loses a life, and you kind of storm off, play these 2 cards and win. So I made a Pauper Storm deck that was I basically just took the old Pauper Storm videos before Grape Shot was banned and then slotted in an Epicure of Blood and Weather the Storm. And that worked pretty well. So that was like step 1 of the deck. And then you can actually look on my channel. So the very next couple days, I released one called Ape Fish Belcher, which kind of tried to do the same thing of Storm, but I discovered that Energy Tap and Delve creatures interacted very favorably with Rush of Knowledge. So Rush of Knowledge is like a 5-mana card. You draw cards equal to the converted mana cost of a creature. With Delve creatures, you can play them very cheaply. So that deck I built, and the mana was terrible because we were playing Gurmag Angler and I forget the green Delve creature. It's like the ape.
Hooting Mandrills.
Yeah, Hooting Mandrills, thank you. Yeah, like that deck was kind of fun. It was like almost an improvement of that Storm deck, but it essentially stormed into just a bunch of Gurmag Anglers, and that was it. And you would just play a bunch of fish, and then you would wait a turn, and then you would attack. The next iteration, I put Goblin Bushwhacker in the deck, and I replaced Hooting Mandrills with Shambling Attendants. So the mana was better, and now you could win on the same turn. So it was kind of like a Storm deck, where you would play a bunch of Delve creatures, you would draw your entire deck in one turn, and then just swing out. And then I decided we build up enough Storm combo that we can slot back in the Epicure of Blood, weather the Storm win condition, so now you don't have to attack. And that was mostly because I kept losing to Tron, like they kept flickering Stonehorn Dignitary, and I couldn't actually get in my combat step. So that was like the third build, and then the fourth build I switched to mono blue Fischlbrand. So I streamlined the mana base with like Ponder, Preordain, things like that, and that gave us access to Giga Drowse out of the sideboard. So we have an answer to like counterspell decks. And then the final iteration of the deck that I think I'm just up to was, because the final answer is if someone plays Weather the Storm in response to our kill, we just lose. So we switched to Fists of Flame and Blackcleave Goblin. So Blackcleave Goblin is a haste infect creature, and Fist of Flame gives a creature plus X plus O, where X is the number of cards you've drawn, and trample. So you just play the goblin and trample over with infect. And that's kind of the latest build of the deck. I haven't touched it so much since then.
Pretty fascinating evolution in terms of the overall strategy, the elegance of win conditions. It's an interesting story, and it makes me want to ask some questions about what your deck building process is like. You just start with the general concept. Do you work from there, or do you see a card that really interests you? It sort of, motivates you to build around it. What is your, just if the briefest roadmap, right, for the deck building process? How does that look like for you?
Yeah, so it's a tough question to answer in a short amount of time. I'm hoping to make a video eventually that lays it out fully. Most of my deck building is based kind of around combo decks. I would say that's kind of what I'm good at. Right now, I actually just have a list of different cards that can serve different functions that I just update. So when I'm bored or when I just have time, I just go on Scryfall and I'll just browse cards with different search terms. So in a combo deck, there's a couple things you normally need. You need an engine, which normally consists of some way to generate mana at a positive rate per cycle, some way to generate cards at a positive rate per cycle, and then some way to win the game, which is not really the most important thing. Like, you can usually find a way to win the game. And then there's kind of subcategories like things to help you with consistency, beat hate, disruption, and stuff like that. So I have like lists of these things kind of laid out, like cards that add mana. So there's the Defenders in there, if you see my Walls combo, Energy Tap, Burnt Offering. Really any like thing that adds mana at a rate that seems kind of ridiculous is in that list. And then the card draws in another list. And when I look for decks, I basically try and find cards that serve multiple functions. Like there's overlap between where your card draw engine and your mana generation engine kind of overlap. So a good example of that would be Fischlbrand, where Energy Tap works well with creatures with high converted mana cost. Rush of Knowledge works well with creatures with high converted mana cost. So I was like looking through those two lists and I was like, wait, these should be in a deck together. And then I did it. So another example real quick is the mono green storm list that I kind of came out with. And in that one, there's I think it's an elf, and it sacrifices to untap all forests you control. So that's your mana generation engine. And then Gaia's Touch lets you put an extra basic forest into play every turn. So that kind of ramps you. And then what's the name of the creature? It's 3 mana, and when it dies, it gives you 2 lands.
Yavimaya Elder, right? The one you sacrifice?
Yes, and then so Yavimaya Elder gives you more forests, so you can, you have forests in play, you're drawing forests, and then you're putting forests out so you can ramp even more. But Yavimaya Elder also draws a card, and so like you're using the card that gets creatures back from the graveyard with Recover to go infinite with your elf, but if you also use that with Yavimaya Elder, now you can draw your whole deck in the same loop. So it's really like finding these like kind of synergies where your card draw engine and your mana engine can use the same card. that I think is what I look for.
And so how do you fill that out, right? Once you have the main components, but you need to find some role players for your deck. What's that search process like? Now, you've explained you have a spreadsheet for these cards that work for generalized things as well. Once you have some things that work together, I mean, how do you find the rest of the deck?
A lot of testing. That's harder to explain. It's kind of like I just see it. Like once I get the core engine, you just kind of put stuff around it. I wish I had a better like way to explain that part of the process, but it's like I just keep testing the core engine and I see things that I'm missing and I just put those things in there. Unfortunately, I don't have a great explanation. It's kind of just intuition and a little bit of luck in like what cards I see. But mostly I just go into MTGO and I will just goldfish the deck for hours and change cards, goldfish the deck and see if it gets better or not. You know, once you've spent enough time looking through Scryfall to like build out the combo spreadsheet, you're pretty familiar with most of the cards that you can play. And then if I need a very specific niche role player, so for example in the mono green Storm deck, I needed my lands to tap for more than just green mana. So you can just search for like enchant land taps for more mana or something like that. So it's just a lot of searching and testing usually.
Let's talk a little bit about those recent brews that have come up. You've mentioned Mono Green Storm and Walls. What motivated you to make those decks? What card did you see that started that process?
So for Mono Green Storm, it was the elf. I don't know the name of it, but it sacrifices to untap all forests. So as I mentioned, I usually search for cards that there's a couple keywords I search for mana generation. So if you want to brew, here's some tips. I'll search for something that says untap. I search for something that says add mana. I mean, those two are the big ones. But that elf was weird in the way it's worded because I usually search untap permanent and untap creature and untap land, but this one specifically says untap all forests. So it had just escaped my search for I don't know, like 2 years. I hadn't found it, and then I was actually brewing the Walls deck and I came across the elf. So I was searching for all green creatures with converted mana cost 2, which I'll get to in a second for the Walls deck. I came across this elf and I was like, well, I have to build this deck first because I don't know. I had been looking for something that had that type of effect for a while. And so I saw it and I kind of slotted it into this Gaia's Touch deck that I had been working on and it kind of worked. So that hopefully answers that. For the Walls deck, for me, it was Crashing Drawbridge. I saw it, I got very excited about it because the ability to tap to give everything haste is really powerful and it's a defender. So I knew Axebane Guardian existed and that card is just kind of screaming to be broken, right? Anything that says tap to add X mana where X is something is kind of open to be abused. And then you also get Overgrown Battlement. So there's 2 creatures who can just tap for like absurd amounts of mana and you can give them haste. So that's kind of just where I started, is looking at those, and then I just did a search for defenders. Shield Sphere was a weird inclusion that probably people will ask a lot of questions about, but when you think about it from the perspective of like, it's very similar to Mox Opal, and that it's like this thing that costs 0 mana that adds mana if you meet a condition. In this case, it's if you hit one of your creatures that tap for mana equal to the number of defenders you control. The Shield Sphere suddenly, you could put it in air quotes like this adds mana because it increases the amount of mana the other ones tap for. I went from there and then I just kind of slotted in the core engine from my Soul Sisters deck that seems to work pretty well, which was like the 12 lands Quirion Ranger with a lot of the 1 mana creatures that tap for mana, and then Winding Way lead the Stampede. And then from there, the deck is kind of just finished at that point.
Well, speaking of that deck, it seems to be the first one sort of crossover into the competitive side of the Pauper format. Previously, while your decks were known to exist, they weren't really something that was expected to take down a tournament or anything like that. Now, I know the Soul Sisters deck, it made an appearance in the deck list dump that comes out every Wednesday, where they share the 5-0 lists, which are unique enough to be published. And I've seen it there, like I said, once or twice. But right now, there are at least 6 known 5-0 Walls decks from a multitude of different pilots. And these are just people that are, out there saying, hey, I got a 5-0 with Walls. So we don't actually know the true number. Only Wizards of the Coast would know. There are 6 known 5-0 lists for Walls, and it's just the ones we know about. We don't know how many people got 5-0s in the Pauper leagues with Walls, but there are 6 that we know about at this point.
That's I didn't know that. I think Diego Brando, I know he 5-0'd, but I didn't know there were that many. The deck is good, though. I definitely can attest to that. A deck that has game against Tron while being pretty strong against the rest of the meta seems like it is pretty well positioned.
Well, I gotta tell you, I took a little spin with it the other night. The deck is a lot of fun to play. I would appreciate it more playing in paper at a local game store where I can just say, hey, I do these actions. I have this amount of mana. I gotta do these actions, right? It's a bit tedious to actually play it on MTGO. There is a lot of clicking. So anyone looking to try the deck out online, know what you're getting yourself into, is a lot more clicking than even a deck like Familiars. But the clicking is hard to mess up, which is nice, right? You're just clicking mana symbols for the most part. Now, in terms of how it went for me, I built myself as a wall because I finished 0-4, like an overgrown battlement. Unfortunately, in the first round, I had a close first round, and I just had never played the deck before, so I made a slight mistake that wound up costing me the match in 3 games. Then I played against Blue-Red Fae, which appears to be the deck's worst matchup in that they have counterspells and spellsetter sprites, and they have screds. It's real tough to land a 2-card combo against a deck just chock full of answers, all of which operate at instant speed. Additionally, post-board, if they want to, they can get you with the Swirling Sandstorm to make you even less effective. And they also have Pyroblasts for, the card that matters in terms of making the combo properly operate for infinite mana. So got to play against that twice. And then in the 0-3 bracket, I get paired against your Soul Sisters deck. And it's really interesting because it's just like this Caleb fest, because you're actually messaging me on Discord to set up, when we're going to do this interview. And I'm playing a league with your deck while playing against your deck while you're messaging me. So it's like this whole trifecta. It's like, well, it's all coming together now. And then we get to game 3. My 7-card hand had 1 forest and no 1-drops, and I felt like it was kind of sketchy to keep a 7-card hand that was 2 Wall of Roots, a forest, a Lead the Stampede. I might have had an overgrown battlement. I mean, maybe, but it just wasn't. I didn't even have an Axebane, so. But even if I did, it costs 3. I mean, the whole thing is it didn't look like a keepable 7. Sent that back. No lands on 6. Sent that back. No lands on 5. Sent that back. No lands on 4. Conceded the game. So it wasn't like walls necessarily failed me. It's not like I think the deck is bad. I think the deck can't realistically beat Blue-Red Fairies at this time, which is an interesting trade-off because there's so many decks out there that just they trade off well, I can't beat Tron. And that's just the strategy for the tournament. It's okay, well, I can't beat Tron, but I have game against all these other decks. And well, maybe walls will have to adapt to some similar thinking in that I'm not sure that you can beat Blue-Red Fairies with this deck, but don't let that stop you from trying to play it. The deck certainly is fun and has a lot of game against other decks. You should just be maybe a little bit more familiar, take a little bit of time, goldfish it, practice it before you just hop in a league with it, as I did, if you want to do better than say 0-4.
You were just going for the max embodiment of walls. With the 0-4.
I mean, I could have tried to become a Wall of Roots, but I think Overgrown Battlement is enough for me.
Yeah, it's a little bit better at that point. Yeah, Blue-Red Fae, from what I've seen, seems like a very, very tough matchup. I wonder if putting reach creatures in the sideboard as a transformative. So a creature I think is very underrated in the meta is Nessian Asp. I don't see anybody playing it, but it's a 4/5 reach, which can get around Lightning Bolt and Galvanic Blast. I guess that doesn't matter against Blue-Red Fae, but once you monstrous it, it's almost impossible to kill, and it's really it can kill them pretty quickly. So I wonder if some type of transformative Penumbra Spider Nessian Asp sideboard could do something against Blue-Red Fae. I'll leave that up to the pros though. I don't really play too much high level competitive.
Yeah, I mean, if someone's willing to dedicate themselves to truly learning walls, who knows what we might see, just as your own evolution happened previously with Fischlbrand, where the first product of the deck doesn't really look like a whole lot like the end product of the deck. Who's to say where the metagame is at with its evolution of walls? It was your creation, and you sort of gifted it to the community, and we'll just have to see where people take it. If they really want to be Blue-Red Fae, another option just might be doing that thing where you have 10 sideboard cards just for one matchup, and then you just have a couple silver bullets or whatever for the other ones. So I'm not sure how to approach it myself. It seems pretty bad in terms of matchups. Now, in addition to there being at least 6 known undefeated runs in leagues with your walls deck, Diego Brando MTG just took 11th with it in the Sunday Challenge, being kept out of top 8 in his win and in round, and his tiebreaker's not really doing the job for him. So he finished 11th with walls, which lends it even more credibility. In addition to taking down a league, this deck can perform well in challenge. What's it like to have one of your brews cross that line into the competitive Magic scene and be recognized by the community?
It's first of all exciting. Unfortunate for Diego that he lost on tiebreakers. Tiebreakers are always brutal. For me, it's very validating. I've been making Pauper decks for quite a while now. As mentioned before in the podcast, people view them to be fun, but not necessarily competitive. And I think even though I've been kind of trying to get more competitive with my deck, I feel like they've been kind of being shrugged off as like a meme. Abzan Soul Sisters was kind of like that. I get a lot of responses when I make a deck like, well, if it was good, people would 5-0 with it. I don't really play my decks in tournaments aside from the video you see, so I'm not going to 5-0 with my deck. So it takes someone who's willing to kind of trust the deck that I've made and bring it into a tournament or competition or a league or things like that. Give it a shot to try and 5-0. And so it's just really cool that someone like Diego is not only willing to play my deck in leagues, I think he's like 5-0'd, like I think he said like 3 leagues or something like that, which is amazing, but bring it to the weekly challenge, you know, give the challenge a very good run, get 11th. That's exciting for me, both that it kind of validates my deck building capability, but also just that people are willing to give them a shot is very exciting.
Well, looking forward to see what the next iterations are, whether it's the evolution of the Walls deck or if you have a brand new combo deck that's going to come out. Very excited to see what you come up with next, and excited to see just how far Walls can run it up in that placement. See if it can go from 11th, maybe crack the top 8 next time, maybe even win the tournament. I mean, Slivers won a challenge, so really anything's possible, if I feel like.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. We'll just have to wait and see.
I think that's a fascinating story. From start to finish, you see a deck that you wanted to build, you got excited about crashing Drawbridge, and now other players can get excited about crashing Drawbridge. Usually on the podcast, we have a segment called Play of the Day, but neither one of us really played a tournament all too recently, so we're going to have to skip it this week. Do you have, however, a silly Slivers ability to share with us?
Yeah, I do. So it's all Slivers gain Sliver Storm. Essentially, they gained a number of Storm copies equal to the number of slivers that were cast before them this turn, and then you make copies of the tokens equal to that storm count.
Those seems like it'd work really well with Gemhide Sliver, right? Because you're going to want a lot of mana in this deck.
Yeah, that's the idea. I would just mostly want to try it on MTGO and see what happens.
Yeah, you could probably get it up pretty high if you jam a lot of slivers down from your hand. You know, that 4th copy could make a lot of copies of itself, especially if it's a Sliver Lord. So that would be pretty silly on a couple different axes on which you can judge what is silly and what is not silly. That's certainly silly because it would probably get banned in at least one format, I would imagine. And it would be silly in that it would be hilarious to see those games. Maybe in one of the unsets someday, Wizards can play around with Sliver Storm.
I really just want to see any card with Storm equal to the storm count, because that would be
Oh, it's Sliver Storm, so it's even sillier.
Yeah, so like I didn't do the math, but it's the slivers have storm equal, they have normal storm, but the number of copies of the storm ability is equal to the number of slivers played before. So like if you played 4 slivers in a row, each sliver would have 4 copies of 4 storm activations.
So it's exponentially silly then.
Yes.
Well, usually I try to play off my guess ability, but I'm going to have to go a different direction this week because that one is uniquely silly. I'm not going to do a magic ability. I'm going to pull this a different way. All slivers have a mild peanut allergy, so if you're looking to take one out to dinner, right, you better stop the waiter before they go off to the kitchen and just make sure that everything's okay for the sliver to enjoy their meal. You know, everyone else's.
Oh, poor guys.
I don't know. Is there really too many good peanut dishes? Are they really missing out with that food allergen?
Yo, peanut tofu? Have you ever tried that?
Maybe.
Or like any Thai peanut sauce dish? You definitely got to go for that.
Yes, see, they are missing out on Thai food. That's for sure. They are definitely no Thai food for slivers.
That's a rough ability.
But all slivers have not been to Thailand, so it's kind of okay. They don't really know what they're missing out on just yet.
Yeah, if they don't know what they're missing, then it's not too bad. That's one of those like defensive slivers you would play to counteract an opposing sliver deck. Like the 4 mana one that makes slivers do damage on their upkeep. the peanut allergy one seems like it would slot really well in the sideboard.
I mean, I'm laughing. I don't know what to say to that. It's like, I'll show you. Oh, you're playing slivers? Hey, me too, pal. Let's good luck enjoying Thai food now. Just wait till games 2 and 3. There's not gonna be any Thai food for anybody.
Yeah. It's like a double sideboard. So you have the peanut allergy in your sideboard, and then your like secondary sideboard is what you brought for lunch, and then you pop that out game 2.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to have you. I can't wait to see what you come up with next in terms of your brews for Pauper. I know it's going to be exciting. It's probably going to be a very unique combo deck.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, just sitting down and talking, and maybe you'll see my name on the top of a challenge someday too. We'll see.
And thanks once more to my guest for coming on the podcast. Truly an enlightening episode, because I learned a lot about the process of deck building. I would have never guessed it involved a spreadsheet. In fact, that seems to be a recurring theme on the last handful of episodes. There have been 3 guests now that have used spreadsheets to help them be more successful in their endeavors. Really makes me question what my Excel rating is. It's probably worse than my limited rating. But what's really, truly interesting about the Caleb discussion is that Crashing Drawbridge came out last set. That's not a Theros card. We are in what should be the Theros metagame. And yet this gem from Throne had gone so underappreciated. It wasn't until Caleb got around to having the time to play with it that we have a new archetype in Pauper, or rather a more playable version of a previous fringe archetype. Now we have a contender. In addition to the 11th place finish by Diego Brando MTG that we discussed, Caleb and I missed out that Methodical, the all-time challenge top 8 leader, snuck into top 16 as well with his own take on the deck. His sideboard's interesting. It's a bit different than the other ones. I'm not sure if Ulamog's Crusher as a 4-of is a realistic transformation plan, but my knowledge of this archetype is excessively limited, so I can't really be one to judge. But it is an interesting concept. And if someone like Methodical is playing the deck, well, I think that proves the deck is here to stay. It's going to be part of the format. Whether a tier 3 player or a tier 1 monster will remain to be seen. I think that if everyone were playing Tron, Walls would be very good, but if everybody's going to be playing Blue-Red Fae, then Walls seems pretty poor as far as metagame selections go. But back to that spreadsheet. What else is lurking in Caleb's spreadsheet? Just waiting to be brought out. Just waiting to be brewed with. As new cards get printed, previous entries into that spreadsheet will come to the surface, will be brought to light. And it'll be very interesting to see what cards have been around for a while that no one else played with, that Caleb's just waiting for a piece to be printed so that he can make some new broken combo deck. And I can't wait to see what he does next. Coming up on the podcast, I'm going to do my very best to track down the finalists from the most recent Pauper Gannon in Italy. They had about 240 players. The finals was a split between a Tog Shift, which is the more combo version of Affinity, and Tron, which was piloted by a previous guest of this podcast in Adepto Terra, whom you may recall from an episode entitled The Italian Flavor of Tron. Well, gonna do my best to get both of their voices heard, try to further that discussion that I started with the Brazilian national champion about the difference between real life playing and playing online. And Adepto seems like the perfect person to continue that discussion with, as he is an online challenge winner, as well as a Pauper champion. And I'm looking forward to bringing that conversation to you. So please do join me on the next episode, and I'll see you there.